So, Autism Speaks tries to paint all autistic people as unthinking retards who are violent and hateful. The reality is, most of us are alright. Most of us, as long as your environment isn't incredibly loud, we do alright. Even those of us who are non-vocal autistic people, we do alright under the proper conditions. Now, when it comes to stimming, you pretend that stimming is a violent act, that being in pain is a violent act, that being defensive is a violent act. No, it's not. When people are harming you, you have the right to get defensive. You know, it's one thing to say ignore words, it's another one to tell them just to pretend that people don't hit them, don't harm them. Autism Speaks, you get to see how they try to paint all autistic people as monsters. They don't speak for autism. They speak for parents who like to abuse us, who don't try to understand us. And because they are abusive, we get a bad reputation. When you are embarrassed because your kid is stimming, or because they're overwhelmed and they're making a sound that helps them to calm down, but you don't want to hear it, you're annoyed by it. You're annoyed by it enough that you actually smack your kids. Most of us know what it's like to be hit by our parents for crying. But what if you don't cry? For me, I went a lot of years without crying. I didn't have a family. I just knew the system, being shipped around from place to place. Not because I was a bad person, but because my family couldn't stay off of drugs. Whose fault is that? Autism Speaks, it has these videos that they post out. And, you know, they focus on low-functioning autism, which, well, here's something you might not know, but our medical specialists, even to this day, debate whether or not Asperger's and that type of autism are the same thing. What we do know is that the primary determining factors for a lot of people, because of what they assume about autism, they look at signs of trauma and abuse. And that gets very confusing because that's not who we are. See, having hyperlexia, that's an autistic trait. Being overwhelmed by my environment because my brain wants to take in everything at once, that's an autistic trait. Being violent is not an autistic trait. Now, for some people who are low functioning, some of them, it can be. Everybody over at Shannon Alvarado's, they all know that if you sit down, she's going to pull your hair. She's going to try to get you to stand up. She just doesn't want you to sit down. And she doesn't ever want to sit down either. For her, she's insistent that others in the household stim the way that she does, or she hurts them, but she also gets away with it. The other thing is, there's a lot of reasons for her other stimming and a lot of her other reactions, and most of it comes down to her mother screaming. Always screaming. Always having to be the one doing the talking. And if anybody else talks, well, it's time to talk over. You get to see and hear how sounds around me affect my ability to communicate. And how being afraid of the people in my environment does result in my Tourette syndrome coming out even more. It results in me having more panic attacks, and yes, I have them online. I don't hide shit. Now, as far as a lot of people at the very beginning wanted to pretend that they cared, didn't keep their words. That's the part that hurt me, was that they didn't keep their words. When I asked them to follow the legal route, to help me with the legal route, and told them what the legal route was, they wanted to argue with me and tell me it doesn't work. Well, it does work if you work together. It doesn't work if you're on your own. Poor people can see justice be done. We've seen this time and again with groups that work together. But you know what? You gotta have a dog in the fight. A lot of y'all pretend that we don't get metaphors. No, we do. It just doesn't make sense. We're literal. Yes, I get what it means. I understand the context and the context in which you're using it. I even understand whether or not you're using it out of context. That's one of the things that's so lovely about Christians, is that I was raised Christian. Well, I was raised in the system, but my mother wanted me to be a Christian, and she wanted all the rest of us to be Christians. She's more of a weekend warrior type of person. When it benefits her, she's a Christian. It happens. Todd Rust is the same way. Tend to be your go-tos when it comes to someone easy to victimize. Reactions that you have when people tell the truth about what you've done. Well, you want to retaliate against us in a very childish way, and then, of course, you say that we're the ones acting like children. No. No, you want to make me give you equality. I can give you equality. No, I can. And you know why I'm not capable? Because even thinking of stuff like that is gross. Whenever Chris Stegeman would talk about torturing people, which just grosses me out, you know, I always used to think about if somebody did those things to me. And it makes it difficult to be able to keep focused. It's compounded by when Harley Davidsons go by, or that little dinky Suzuki earlier. I don't know how they made it sound like that. That was incredible for a Suzuki. It's a little Suzuki Roadster, probably, I don't know, early 80s, late 70s. Alright, so let's get back to the video. I gotta go inside and get some stuff done and charge up my electronics. You guys assume a lot of things about us that you project. You project them in your assumptions and in your suggestions as well. And we tell you over and over and over again that it's not going to work if we have to do it alone. And then you want to tell us a bunch of phone numbers to call. No, we need a friend or family member to call the numbers with us. That's the point. A friend or family member has to make the call with us, or it's not going to get taken seriously. For most of our society, autism means retarded. Homeless means lazy. White means oppressor. Man means abuser. According to those stereotypes, men like me shouldn't exist. I should be one of the monsters that you pretend that I am. And then we've got Autism Speaks. This is one of the people that wanted to cure autism, basically shock therapy and other forms of abuse, to abuse us so that we don't show any signs of stimming. If we get the shock, or we get whacked. Now, this very same doctor did the very same thing to homosexuals because homosexuality was considered a mental illness. I fought hard for people in the LGBT community, but they don't fight for us. A lot of times their disabilities are a crutch to hide behind. Mostly because it's not just a crutch to hide behind, it's the fact that when you use that as an excuse not to come forward, you probably have experience in being called mentally ill when you tried to come forward about your abusers. For many of the people that I grew up with in the system, Christian and atheist alike, Muslims, even some Buddhists, I was locked up with the most abused people in the country. That's what the juvenile system is. And that includes foster care. See, I was never in juvenile hall. I was never sentenced to juvie. It's because I didn't go running around doing bad things. But also, people have these assumptions of autism that make it so that automatically they assume that they know better than we do. The reality is that you abuse us for telling you that we have emotions, for telling you emotions, for showing emotions. And then you want to tell us it's okay for us to have emotions, and it's okay for us to show emotions. And then you project emotions onto us that we don't even have. And then the projection of the wives' tale is that we must all be violent, low-functioning people. That's not what autism is. I've got a very high IQ. I've got what's called hyperlexia, which means I was able to read, well, far dyslexia. For me, growing up with parents that I wasn't allowed to see because they couldn't stay off of whatever it is they were doing, made it so that I had a lot of time to read, and I did a lot of reading. So, then I increased my college reading level at the age of 6, and everywhere that I went after that,
so that would be in the science fiction section, which is in the fiction section, the far right shelf, and it would be under Sanderson. If not, I'm sure we carry it somewhere, but I can throw it for you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Hey there.
So, is there a room I could get for a few hours? So I was told there might be a cart that I could use to get my computer in and up here.
There are carts in the back. You could have like shelving carts.
It's not real heavy, I just have a screwed up back.
Yeah. Do you have it on you?
No, it's downstairs in my car.
Okay, yes. So I would check with the front desk because they have like shelving carts back there. And if they've got one, I'm sure they could let you. How long do you need it?
As long as I can get it.
Okay, so we can do until 5. And what's the name?
Sean, S-H-A-W-N.
All right, here we go.
Perfect.
I'll get that room for you. There we go.
Thank you much.
You're welcome.
One of My favorite people to ever exist was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When I speak of things that I enjoyed when someone else says it, telling quotes, well, a lot of people want to go, oh, you're comparing yourself to... Well, we all compare ourselves, don't we? We like to find the comparisons that paint us in the nicest light, and the people we're angry with in the meanest one. With a lot of these people, I don't paint them as mean. They're cowardly, so I state that they're cowardly. And then they get mean because I stated that they're cowardly. And then I say they're mean. And then they tell me what a mean person I am. Well, of course. Nobody likes their own medicine. Nobody. And if the volunteer didn't like her own medicine, I believe in doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, and protecting children is always the right thing to do. So no matter who you are, if somebody is informing me about child abuse, you're going to have to take a back seat. When it comes to child abuse, I'm going to take a back seat. I am not as important as these children. No matter how intelligent I am, it is not a fair trade in any way, shape, or form. And one of the things that I have an issue with is having enough time to actually hook up everything here in the library. And a lot of people suggested the library way back since in the beginning. But also there's different stuff at different places that makes it difficult, like scheduled appointments or having to wait around on somebody to go with you if they promise to teach you how to do something that you can't do for yourself. And when it comes to being overwhelmed, especially as an autistic person, it is very difficult for somebody like me who learns very well from reading. It's difficult for me to sit down and be able to focus because I'm in a constant state of movement. It's difficult for me to get anything through the mail, and I'm constantly having to try to come up with the money for a mailbox because I had to move again. And then I have to wait for that to get started. And then I have to spend all the money to go travel to the mailbox, meanwhile stuck homeless. Or you tell me how I have to trust other people, but how can I? Every time I trust people, they show me that I'm just an autistic retard to them. That I don't matter, that I'm insignificant. Try to show people through example. When that doesn't work, well then I'll show them by mirroring their example. How does it feel when I do it back? How does it feel when I show up back? Does it feel good? Is it something that you're proud of doing to me? Because it's not something that I ever thought I would have to treat you in such a way for you to get it. Except with these people, of course, I choose to tell the truth. Whereas they chose to hide like rats rather than admit that they screwed up. And then there's lots of people that get a hold of me and say, oh, look at this, why didn't you admit to this, why didn't you admit to that? I'm like, oh, look at that, it says Sean David Schwartz and it's on a public post. By the way, all my posts were public before Natalie was killed. It was literally Natalie's death, several months after her death, that resulted in me making stuff private and learning how to do all that. Took a while, and they were able to destroy a lot of evidence just because I didn't have help. So I've got a bunch of my stuff charging up. And that's currently the best I can do with it. We've got a real problem here in the United States with places like Autism Speaks, presenting a real bad rendition of who we are. It's always in the movies, they try to pretend like we're freaking out for no reason. With that Autism Speaks one, a lot of us, we've seen what they did in that. When you've got someone who's stimming, and they're moving their hands because they're stimming, but you're embarrassed as a parent because your child is doing that. Well, your child is stimming. It doesn't hurt anyone. When they're overwhelmed with the environment, they're overwhelmed with the environment. Smacking them around until they're no longer overwhelmed with their environment isn't going to make them no longer overwhelmed with their environment. It now makes them overwhelmed with their environment and overwhelmed with being smacked. When they're stimming and you don't like the way that their hands are moving and you grab them so that their hands can't move, why are you doing that? Do you want someone else restricting your movement? You're not hurting anybody. They shouldn't be putting their hands on you. Meanwhile, it's not just putting their hands on you. People get quite forceful and quite mean, and they've done the same thing to me for having Tourette syndrome most of my life. There's a lot of people who are autistic that I've come to realize many of them do have the same issues as I do with PTSD, and also with people assuming that if a male is exhibiting signs of trauma, that he's a violent monster. No, we're not. We're absolutely not. We're human beings, same as you. I don't have any ambitions of killing people or hurting people or harming people, but listen to how many people want to talk about harming others on my channel. Listen to how overwhelming it gets for me. How many times when I tell somebody, please, I don't like that, and they do it over and over and over again. But then when there's something that they don't like, oh, Sean, how dare you tell me your story? How dare you? I don't like that. You're evil, Sean. It's not the same both ways, is it? Trying to tell on bad cops, all they have to do is, well, you're told everything takes time. They can press charges on you immediately upon contact, false charges, and get away with it if you're a disabled homeless male. Then there's much of the LGBT community that doesn't cause no problems to anybody. But because they're not hetero, then they must be bad people, right? Isn't that what you try to sell us? Yes, I'm technically part of the LGBT community. I'm just not accepted by the LGBT community. It's different. But I don't have to be accepted by anybody to be a human being. I don't have to be accepted by white people to realize that I'm white. I keep hearing all this, oh, well, whites take care of their own, whites take care of their own. Really? You just gotta make that generalization as if it must be true just because you said it? Well, I ain't that ignorant, cowboy. And we got the biggest joke in all of it. Therapists. How many of you go to your therapist because you're at risk and you're being abused, and then all you do is end up talking to your therapist who does nothing but make you come back in a couple of weeks? Meanwhile, I was very clear about my intentions with all of these places, and all of them knowingly, willingly, and intentionally chose to mislead myself and others. So yeah, I speak up. Nicole Vertner wanted to pawn me off on someone it's a bad idea to pawn me off on. He's not peer support. She was talking to him about a peer support position. That was Brian. I saw him the other night, and I believe I saw him last night as well. Last night or the night before. So I've seen him. Just, the thing is, he's not going to do any of those things, and he's not going to show up. He'll lose entire days because he's on drugs, or because he's busy dealing with his own trauma and drama. Meanwhile, Autism Speaks, they pretend that low functioning autism is violence. That we're so uncontrollably horrible that it's okay for people to do that to us. There was one lady on one of the videos, she was over by an airport during a picnic. Her son was low functioning autistic, but he was also in a wheelchair. And, you know, he was having a reaction to the airplanes going overhead and being so loud. And it was loud. And when he started moving his arms weird and making noises because he was not able to speak, his mother went over there and wanted to hold his hands. Like, physically restrain him because she didn't like the way his hands were moving. And he didn't hit her, he started rocking back and forth. She said he was trying to headbutt her. He wasn't. He was rocking back and forth because that was part of his stimming. Now he was rocking back and forth a little bit, just a few inches back and forth when she first came up to him, and the rocking back and forth became more, longer strides. And she was holding his hands down, pushing him down into his lap and holding him there. Wasn't allowing him to move. She was yelling at people they needed to help her to restrain him against his wheelchair because he was rocking back and forth. And in this video, thank goodness they took it down, but there's a few people who still speak up about it, and a few of the incidents in that video that are posted up. That's one of them. And Autism Speaks was trying to use this video to get people to donate money to Autism Speaks so they can cure autism. And all the rest of you, you're not understanding that for the rest of us, those of us who are high functioning, that this isn't something that needs to be cured. What needs to be cured is your education, because we're not low functioning autistic people. Now that young man in the video, he did actually hit her in the video. He absolutely did. She was holding his hands down and yelling at him. He eventually got his hands free and let her know under no uncertain circumstances would she ever put her hands on him like that. That is not okay. Is it okay to do that to people for stimming? Is it okay to restrain people for stimming? This is supposed to be for violent people, not for scared people. Then you tell us it's our fault. Many of you want to pretend like you have no fears. I know your fears. You tell me your fears. Because I'm a wallflower, like many of us are. We don't get to be a part of your society because we have trauma. No matter what's going on, no matter how much abuse we're going through, you want to talk about you. Just like Autism Speaks and the people that they actually speak for. Autism Speaks speaks for abusive parents. Now, there's a lot of things that help out low-functioning autistic people that they do actually advertise, at least to a small degree, but those things are incredibly expensive and you can do it yourselves. The other thing is the complete and total ignorance and denial of high-functioning autistic folks, which, like I said, the signs of long-term abuse and trauma are exactly the same as your assumptions of what autism is. So when you see somebody who is exhibiting signs of trauma, do you recognize it as a sign of trauma, or do you just pretend they're mentally ill? Do you pretend that they're crazy? Do you pretend like if their words don't come together right because they're overwhelmed, that they must be crazy? Are you preying on their speech impediments? Are you preying on people's assumptions of their gender? There's a lot of women who came at me as groups. When you type about it in YouTube and Facebook groups about how they should all come together and try to get my Facebook and my YouTube destroyed. And they've tried a lot. But that doesn't stop me from speaking up and from trying to get all of that evidence turned into where it needs to go. One thing that makes that an impossibility is the absence of a friend or family member who's willing to listen. A friend or family member who actually does care about my well-being more than their alcohol consumption. Let's see how much charge I have on here. It's all cracked up in the corner. And it's like 31%. Anyway, if you've paid attention, you've gotten to see plenty of evidence of people who have been abusive towards me. You've gotten to see the names of many of them. And the things that they had to say, the way they tried to play it off after the fact. And of course, I do go back through and try to gather up all the evidence in one place to make it easier to show. That doesn't always work. Sometimes I get overwhelmed and sometimes I'm forced to move. Alright, I got a bunch of stuff out and I go downstairs and try to get my computer. And hopefully when I get back up here, hopefully I'll be able to get some work done. Oh wow, that made me real lightheaded. The problem is, without a place for me to process it, I can't turn these people's words in. Best I can do is through my phone over YouTube and Facebook. That's the problem with getting somebody who really needs help and then taking away all of their resources, taking away all of their friends and family, taking away their ability to go to a library safely. I'm not sure if you knew this, but after Natalie died, it was all over the news everywhere. Especially in Colorado, Nebraska, Wyoming.
boyfriends are appropriate.
You know, they don't serve coffee at AA meetings anymore, which is really sad. It's the only thing I'm addicted to. Oh, don't laugh at my jokes. It only encourages me. I got a screwed up back, and I got my car.
Back on your trash.
Sorry. I have difficulties speaking while other people are talking. It makes it difficult. Anyway, I was told that you guys might have a car in the room upstairs where I'm using it for like another hour or so.
Okay.
They've got food up at one of the churches at 4, so I'm gonna head up there. Depending on how busy they are, I might try to talk to Eileen about the mandated reporter thing. So here's the thing. Chanel Boggs, many other mental health people, as well as people who work at the hospital, have spoken to me, and it is reported on my channel that they are aware that those things are happening, that it is frequent, they do see it, that they do hear it, and also that they haven't turned it in. They're doing exactly the things that, well, the breach of protocol and procedure, the results of these things happening to begin with. See, it's not the police's fault. The hospitals aren't doing their job of mandating reporters. It's not the hospital's fault that they don't do their job of mandating reporters. It's not the church's fault that they don't do their job as mandated reporters. It's always somebody's job, right? These people are all supposed to work together in these situations, not pawn me onto a bunch of other people. Oh, don't you have friends or family? No. And that's one of their triage questions. Do you understand what triage means? Meanwhile, they're supposed to try to prevent you from getting help because the government doesn't want to help anybody. They want to take your money. We're forced to spend a lot of money to help women. And many of us are glad to be giving our money to help children back when we were able to work. All right, if I take this stuff one piece at a time, I can probably do this. That fucking hurts. Ah! I mean, girl, I'm a big scary bear. I'm not supposed to twist. I'm not very good at following the doctor's instructions, am I? Oh, and did I show you the massive pile of paperwork? I mean, it's a lot. There's a bunch of trash intermittent in there as well. It's mostly paperwork. See, when you're overwhelmed, that's a PTSD thing, not an autism thing. When you're overwhelmed like this, just the fact that we take in more information than everybody else. We pay closer attention to our surroundings. And also, you guys are a lot easier for us to read than the other way around, because you've taught us it's not okay to have emotions or express emotions. But you've told us the opposite. We still know better. Yeah, sure, you're going to tell us that you care, but later on, you're going to stab us in the back for anything we tell you. No matter how good we are to you, the only way for you to get the point is for us to do it back, and how dare we do it back? Alright. let's take my soda pop in so that I can wipe the nasty maggotness off the outside of it. They got a thing in the bathroom that's alcohol based, the little hand cleaner stuff. So I'm going to wipe down the outside of that before I try drinking it. Now, I was able to get a cart. There was a couple other times earlier that I went to get a cart and they said that they had one, but somebody else said they didn't, or that they didn't do that, so it just became a running around thing. But also, many of them do try to be helpful and useful, which is nice. Y'all don't even try to understand how much it sucks to have to sit in your car most of the day, almost every day, because you can't take care of yourself. Meanwhile, the things that were supposed to help you to stop the abuse, instead, the abuse continued. The police looked the other way, the therapists looked the other way. They all got paid for not doing their jobs, and then they got paid to try to cover up their crimes and for false arrests. Not okay. On the bright side, I'm a pretty intelligent feller. Hopefully I can get the stuff into the library that I need to get in there. Hopefully my phone doesn't die. Every time I look at you, I go blind. And every time I look at you, I get higher and higher. Now, what's the biggest problem with Autism Speaks is that they try to paint autistic children, low-functioning autistic children, as monsters. Autism doesn't just stop when you turn 18. People's assumptions and abuse over those assumptions and their bias doesn't stop just because you turned 18. The ignorance that people's parents wanted to tell them about you didn't stop just because you turned 18. Being victimized for being vulnerable doesn't stop just because you turned 18. Matter of fact, it becomes far easier to victimize you, because you can be victimized into homelessness easily. Just as you have no respect for stupid people, as you call it. People who are smarter than you, you just assume are stupid or crazy because you don't understand. You'd understand if you spent more time listening and less time talking. Autism Speaks doesn't speak for us. They don't fight for our rights. They never have. And when you send us to places like that, they send us on to other places. None of them work with us. They tell us to go places. Well, that ends up with us not getting help and wasting all of our time running around in circles. If these places can help other people, they can help me. The problem is that it's a complicated situation, and they need to stop pretending like situations elsewhere couldn't possibly have an effect on the situations that I'm having to live through today. It's called cause and effect. There's also the timeline, which is pretty friggin' important. When did people say what? When did they do what? Well, people wanted to be mean and nasty to me for defending myself and for telling the truth about them. A lot of people didn't like the fact that I told the truth about them. I get that. That's why you shouldn't go slandering people's names or looking the other way after starting that slander and pretending like you didn't do nothing wrong. The situation with Amanda Jonas and others shows a severe degree of gaslighting. Now, it's obvious that the police were gaslighting and have been gaslighting every bit of it. When the police tell the hospital something, the hospital automatically listens to the police. So if you're trying to turn in Officer Steinman and he takes you to the hospital and tells them that you're schizophrenic, that's the end of your life at that point. Your rights just disappeared until you can go and see yourself an actual mental health therapist. A licensed one of them SOBs. And you get yourself your actual diagnosis. You gotta ask them though, am I schizophrenic? Marcia Estrada stated outright that I'm not schizophrenic. That I am not schizophrenic. That I am not delusional. That severe PTSD can mask itself as bipolar disorder. Well, actually, that's getting talked over. That's what gives us PTSD. When we're abused, we're told just to ignore it and move on. Why don't you move somewhere else? Why don't you just pretend it's not real? Why don't you just ignore it? Why don't you just ignore it? That's what I did most of my life, was ignore it when it happened to me. Because I knew that without somebody standing up for me or with me, that I was screwed. So I stood up and for and with other people who were abused. And it does help. There are many occasions where people working together with me did some good. It's when they wanted to push me on to other people that it didn't do any good. Someone calling herself Stephanie Arnold typed, I don't know you, brother, but I feel you, and I'm definitely having you up in prayer in Jesus' name, because autism is not a joke, and it's real, and God bless you. Okay, you can just smile, and at least just one. Well, here's the thing about God. God is not a lawyer. God is not going to come down and testify in court. God isn't going to help out with the paperwork. God isn't going to give you an education on autism. God isn't going to correct any of the damage created by, well, groups like Autism Speaks and Autism My Piece of the Puzzle. These things don't help us. These places don't help us. They paint all of us as monster, and they only focus on low-functioning individuals who are violent. And just so you know, most autistic people are not violent. Also, you might not know this, but schizophrenic people are 12 times more likely to be the victims of violence than to actually be the violent party. But you want to paint everybody who is called mentally ill as a violent schizophrenic, and then pretend like they must deserve anything that they got because they're a violent schizophrenic, and that obviously, since they're a violent schizophrenic, they must have started it and invented it and made it all up. People are dumb. The problem is we have no real advocacy. It's not like BLM, where you've got parents of black kids explaining to them, hey, when your friends run, you can't run. Our parents don't tell us, hey, you know what? If you stim, the cops might shoot you. And yes, we're more likely to get shot than a black person. By a lot. As a homeless person, I have a 1 in 1,000 chance of being killed by a police officer literally every year. That's just being shot or choked to death or beaten to death. There's a lot of other ways to kill a person, like ignoring them while they're being abused, forcing them to go public about their abuse, which gives their predators a heads up and time to work together. The thing is that when you're a disabled and at-risk adult, people don't care. They blow you off and say, oh, well, that sucks, and I'm sorry that happened. And, you know, that stuff happens all over the place. That stuff happens all the time, you know. People want to have a conversation about it, but not a useful conversation because they're not doing anything about it. They're just talking to you or at you. God is fine and dandy and all that. If you want to pray, that's fine. You know, one of my therapists told me I write letters to Natalie Bollinger even though she was dead because it might make me feel better. Well, instead, I just type it in our Facebook messages. Yeah, I know she's dead, and yeah, I know it doesn't actually do any good, and she's not going to read it. That's also something that I was told to do. Now, does that make me delusional because I'm actually typing to a dead woman who I know is dead and is never going to read it? No. Stephanie Arnold typed, time became the fact that you're even talking. This is amazing. And I see life just waiting to burst forth out of you. Know this, I'm listening. Well, I don't know how to explain this. The listening part is important, but so is speaking out. And that's what people aren't getting. A lot of people try to send me on to services that won't do anything without a friend or family member. When it comes to Natalie Bollinger's death, and the way that they tried to paint me before and after she was killed, that's horrible. It's also horrible that I'm not allowed to defend myself against it. Stephanie Arnold typed, my name is Stephanie Arnold. My name is Sean David Schwartz. Good to meet you, Stephanie Arnold. I'm going to put this in my pocket while I cross the road with the cart here. Now for 7 months here in Tillamook, Oregon, I'm jumping around from place to place. Sent from one place to another. Reporters refusing to do their jobs. The therapists that I'm sent to, because they're supposed to be mandated reporters, they're just having me jump around in circles for things that I've already been through before. Resources that I'm now cut off from. But they want to keep beating a dead horse.
I got the door open for you.
Thank you very much. Stephanie is typing some stuff here. Let's see. Stephanie Arnold typed, the fact that you're even talking about autism, which is very real, and the fact that people do have a lack of concern about it is just amazing in itself. Speaking out on it. She also typed, well, I guess you forgot about me, but I haven't forgot about you. I will keep you up in prayer. God bless you. Well, thank you for the prayers. I just hope that somebody does something more than just pray. Like get some education from actual autistic people instead of agencies that are run by people that are not autistic. Places that were started by groups that, well, I don't really care so much about how you might feel about homosexuals just because of the God thing. I've had a lot of Christians that do not like homosexuals and they call homosexuality a mental illness. And one of the guys who started Autism Speaks, he was a therapist. He thought that homosexuality was a mental illness and that he could literally torture people into not being homosexuals. It's the same thing that they still use on autistic people, because while we will fight for the LGBT community, people do not fight at all for the homeless or for the disabled. There's lots of groups that claim to do that, but look how many of these places I've gone to for help, and not a single one of them does their jobs as mandated reporters to take any of it seriously. No matter how many bodies they create, they're not held accountable. They're just that evil. To blame your victims. When somebody wants their life to end, there's always a reason. And usually that reason is abuse and neglect. Well, I was abused and neglected by Natalie Bollinger and her friends and her family and my friends and my family. Natalie Bollinger had a bunch of drug addicts that would do all sorts of stuff. She had all sorts of guys who had crushes on her that would do all sorts of stuff. She also had a sister who was sexually active with Matty Boa, who's the one that spread most of the horrible rumors. But you know what? None of you bothered to find out if those things were true. You're always busy projecting on me what I should want as a man. You have no idea how many women have tried to pester me and bully me into being like a regular man, being just interested in sex, while these are the same women who tell me how horrible it is that men are like that. It's just insanity, and a whole lot of it. However, your prayers and blessings don't do anything without effort. You make no effort to help out the victims of this type of abuse. And you just want to tell them to go places alone that literally won't do anything if they go in alone. It creates a lot more abuse, a lot more neglect. And the people who are being paid to protect us are choosing not to. And it's against the law for them to choose not to, especially when it leads to dead bodies like Natalie Bollinger's. I know a lot of women who are drug addicts and alcoholics through this, who made empty promises, but the reality is most of the people who got a hold of me were drunk or druggies. Majority of them women. The majority of them single, and the majority of them collecting money from an ex. The majority of them also going through custody struggles, either with the state or with an ex-husband or an ex-boyfriend. Many of them have done horrible things, bragged about doing horrible things, the kind of things that you pretend men are doing after you do them to them. I don't get the benefits of being autistic because there are none. It's just abuse. And people pawning you off on God or Jesus or Allah, pawning you off onto a mental health agency that is only going to have you do therapy. They're not going to do their jobs as mandated reporters. You're not going to be allowed a place where you're safe to do all these things or have enough time to do these things. Right now it's 3:04. I gotta go eat in an hour. It's gonna take an hour for my computer to even turn on and be able to function. But you forced me to do these things because you're not gonna help me to do them. You're just gonna give it to God, give it to God, give it to God. God is the laziest creature. No matter what, God is not gonna come down and testify. God is not gonna collect evidence. God is not going to help to turn it in a timely and efficient manner. Between God and a human being, at least human beings aren't entirely useless. The only thing God is useful for is for people to manipulate you. Oh well. My back is killing me. I have no help. I have empty words and people who waste my time. They don't care that I can't get that time back and I can't get those resources back. And when they don't keep their word, it hurts me greatly. And they don't stop to understand why. They're too busy being selfish and thinking about themselves, and only themselves. It's disgusting that I have to deal with so many actual predators because so many people want to pray about it. That's laziness.